as you are all probably well aware of already, I got to participate in the preview event for Season 4. I just want to thank Embark and the entire team there for the show that they put on. It was a very smooth experience. It lasted a lot longer than the other ones, which was really exciting. We got to test out basically everything. I got to go through all the changes that I could find, along with seeing the entire map, and got to test out basically everything that I could. So with that said, I feel like I have a pretty good idea as to how this season is going to go. I do want to give this as a big disclaimer before I start getting into this, is that a lot of the changes, additions that were made on this patch may not go live. I also have a pretty strong suspicion, based on some of the stuff that I've heard from players and the devs, is that the mesh shield changes are more than likely going to be a little bit different on live. I think the version that we saw on that patch might not reflect what we actually get, but I also don't think that the mesh shield is going to be the same as it was in Season 3. So I'm going to touch on some of my thoughts on that in the video, but I also do want to kind of say that it's really hard to say how I feel about it until we see this addition that's going to be in the live patch. And there's a lot of other things that obviously might not make it in. There were also some bugs that made it hard to test certain weapons and sights and stuff like that. So it's really hard to say if it's going to be good or bad. A lot of this is just going to be speculation, but the things that were working as intended, I can have a bit of a better understanding as to how they're going to sit in the meta. And I also feel like previously when I've done these prediction videos and kind of talked about where the meta is going, I've been pretty accurate with it. So I feel pretty confident in a lot of these things. So let's start getting into it. I'm going to go through each kind of section and then give my feedback as we go along. So for the new skins, I really like a lot of the new skins. I feel like they really suit the whole like game show theme aesthetic. A lot of the vibes that we're getting from this season just seem to be reflected really well in the skins that they put out in the store and the battle pass, stuff like that. So far, I mean, they've always been killing it with skins. This game literally has the best aesthetics out of every game, so it's no surprise there. Now with the new sponsorship paths, I think this is like one of the best additions that I've kind of wanted to see literally since beta. I think this was one of the things that I was expecting to be in the game on launch. And when it wasn't, it really felt like, well, you know, we know that the lore is around these sponsors and the game show and all these hosts, and we haven't really seen the sponsors really be reflected in that. There's been the odd skin here or there that ends up in the store, or maybe in the battle pass, or maybe they have like a community event. But overall, it just kind of feels like they haven't been as impactful as they are now. Now we have leaderboard changes where we have sponsorship leaderboards, so you can kind of compete to be the best sponsor or the leading contributor of that sponsor. We also have leaderboards for every single game mode now. So we have like Terminal Attack, Power Shift, Quick Play, Banquet, whatever. So if you are really dedicated to a specific game mode, there's at least a leaderboard to now show the result of that dedication, which I think is awesome. I feel like a lot of people who've been playing, you know, certain game modes that aren't ranked might have been a bit left in the dust here. So this is a really nice addition. I love to see this. Now with the overall game feel, with this game being a game show from the start, I feel like we're finally there. Like when I was playing in the Season 4 preview event, it just genuinely felt a lot more immersive. I really felt like I was in this game show. It felt like I was competing for specific sponsors. You get to see a lot of people representing these sponsors through their cosmetics. There's also been a lot of discussion amongst teammates and friends of like, oh no, I'm supporting this team. No, you shouldn't support that sponsor, support mine. So it seems like a really, really fun element that can kind of go a bit beyond just the gameplay and start to add into more of the lore. We get to learn more about these sponsors. And overall, the world is starting to feel a lot more fleshed out, a lot more polished, and I love it. I just feel a lot more immersed in this, you know, quote unquote game show. Like they keep saying the game show is back, and I 100% agree with that statement. That is exactly how I feel. Now, the game mode, I do want to make a disclaimer. The game mode that we got to play, where it was 3 teams and it was cash out, is not going to be on the live game. This was just kind of a mistake. It was meant to be quick cash with 3 teams, and it ended up kind of getting altered there. So there's not really much I want to say on that. I feel like people might have been asking about that, so I just want to give that disclaimer there. Some people are very confused about, you know, why was cash out with 3 teams? Is this the new quick cash? Blah, blah, blah. We can just ignore that. We still have quick cash, and we still have like the World Tour. World Tour was technically working, but it was really hard to find a game. Sometimes we would wait like 5+ minutes and there wasn't enough people queuing it. So we ended up just sticking with this one game mode that really wasn't what we'd expect on the live server. So unfortunately, I don't really want to give any opinions since it's kind of irrelevant. Now, let's get into the changes to each class, because I think this is really what most people kind of care about. And let's start with Heavy class, which I think is one of the more controversial ones. Now, the new Desert Eagles are incredible. Like, when I was using them, they felt so satisfying to use. They feel very strong. They have a lot of skill expression. Even if you land all body shots, you can kill actually relatively very quick. Even when I was facing somebody with a Deagle and I didn't miss a single shot of my KS-23, they end up killing me faster with their Deagles. And when it comes to landing headshots, that 2x headshot multiplier feels so dang satisfying. You can actually kill a light in 2 headshots with this thing. So really, really strong weapon. They feel very satisfying. And I feel like this is starting to become a theme with this season. And I think this is why a lot of people have been upset, but don't fully understand what these changes are really impacting. And I feel like it's really, really important to start to understand the direction that a lot of these changes are pushing and why it's actually very, very good. So when it comes to the LMGs, these things got buffed. The recoil is so much easier to control. This makes it a lot more accessible. Even at the higher elos, some of these weapons were becoming ridiculous to even use, so we didn't even care to practice them or learn the recoils. We would just stick with stuff like the SA-12, which hasn't been changed. It's the same as it was before, so we still have the very strong SA-12. The LMGs now are buffed and are much more viable to use. We have these Desert Eagles that are really strong. The melees, again, haven't been touched. Flamethrower untouched. KS-23 untouched. MGL, I felt like the impact or like the detonation response was like a little bit better, but that was like just a very minimal testing, so I don't have enough experience with this. We'll have to see what happens with it, but it did feel like it kind of worked a little bit better, but relatively unchanged. So as you can see, all these weapons, there was no nerfs that I could really see. It was a lot of buffs and just making the weapons of the heavy class a lot stronger to compensate for some of the changes that we're going to get into, which is the RPG nerf down from 140 to 100 damage, which this is one of the most welcome changes that I've seen, simply because for so long it felt like the RPG was just mandatory on the heavy class. Now, if you guys don't know a lot of my history with this game, I used to main heavy class back in Season 1. I really liked using the Lewis gun. I try to get a little bit more creative and use stuff like the Charge and Slam and the Goo Gun and stuff like that, even though the Mesh Shield was extremely strong back in Season 1. And then even in Season 2, I kind of went with the Mesh because, well, Mesh was just so strong, and the odd time I bring out the Charge and Slam. But RPG was always in my class, and as time went on with all the nerfs, I ended up switching over to the SA-12, and it really felt like Heavy was pigeonholed into basically just being the SA-12 with RPG, Mesh, and Dome Shield loadout. That was basically all we kind of had near the end, because so many other things started to get kind of like nerfed in RPG, even though it was nerfed, was still the strongest pick. So with the nerfed RPG, it feels like we can finally start to branch out and use other things on this class. And one thing is, like, Heavy, for the longest time, rarely ever dipped outside of the heavy gadgets specifically. What I mean by that is, like, when we look at medium class and the meta that we see in that, there's the odd time where we bring in something like a frag grenade. And the same thing happens with light, where we sometimes bring in a frag grenade. And then goo grenade does tend to get picked up on all the classes from time to time. And the other kind of mutual class gadgets like pyro, gas don't tend to have enough power to get picked up anywhere. But when it comes to heavy, very rarely did you ever dip out. You'd always use something like the barricade, the RPG, the dome shield, the C4, and they were just so strong that it was pointless to kind of dip out. And I feel like they're trying to tone down a lot of the power of the gadgets and sort of buff up a lot of the power of the weapons. That way there's a little bit more variety in the classes that we can build, and we don't have to necessarily rely so much on our gadgets, which I felt made heavy feel very awkward, because it was like, if you don't have your RPG or your dome up, you just kind of felt a little bit useless. Some of your weapons just felt kind of weak depending on what you're using. And I think this is what they're trying to steer away from, is making the class feel a lot more consistent, which I think is a very, very good change and is really welcome. Even throughout a lot of the playtest, I was having so much success on heavy class, not even using the RPG, just sticking with like a goo grenade, dome, and C4 or some sort of other combination of stuff. Even the frag grenades feel a little bit more useful now on the class. And the class overall just feels so much more enjoyable to use, in my opinion, because of this variety. And there's a good chance you're going to see me playing a lot more of the Desert Eagle variant of the heavy class, trying to mix and match and see what meshes well with the class in terms of spec and gadgets and weapon. But I really want to go back to using like the Lewis gun and stuff like this. So heavy to me feels like it's at its peak. This is like the most exciting it's ever been to play heavy class. And I hope that we can kind of keep going in this direction of evening out a lot of the options so that we don't necessarily only have this one version of heavy that we can use. And then when it comes to the mesh shield nerf, like I mentioned before, this kind of more than likely is going to be changed, but the nerf to the activation, the nerf to the health, I felt was a really welcome change. Again, for the reasons I listed before, because the class has been basically using the exact same loadout since day one, and there's a big reason why double heavy is banned in the comp scene and then scrims, because everyone's basically just spamming this exact same loadout over and over again, and it's just so strong. So I'd always said, please stop nerfing the weapons. We need to start nerfing some of the gadgets because it's starting to feel very inconsistent when heavy and their power purely relies on just landing an RPG and then following up with a couple shots. So now feels like you can actually just stand on your own. If you're glitched, you can still do something. If you're stunned, feels like you can still do something with just your weapon. And in general, you feel a lot more powerful without needing this pocket healer all the time. So this is a really welcome change in my opinion. It feels like you can play a little bit more independently and not have so many crutches to lean back on. Now let's get into the medium class changes and my thoughts on that. With the addition of the new weapon called Pike, I feel like this is probably best suited to go onto the medium class. The scope is kind of like a sniper scope. It does have the glint on it, does have a pretty big magnification. So I feel like you can now contest the snipers and the LH1 users that have kind of given medium class a lot of struggle because they don't have much to counter it. So this already is a pretty big counter to light class, which I think is great because I feel like medium has always kind of struggled facing light classes at a further range. Something like a DMR has always been asked to be added to the medium class, and so it's really good that we got it. The power of it feels very, very strong, and even in close range, it's still fantastic. I really like this thing without the scope. The iron sights just seem to have a lot less visual recoil, and it felt a lot more accurate, so that's why I'm a big fan of it. The AKM got actually a 4-bullet nerf to the magazine, so now it isn't 36 bullets. I think this is okay, especially because all the ARs now can get different sights. So the FCAR, now you can get the iron sights, and the iron sights, from what I've heard from people who got to use it, was that it was really good without the visual recoil. It felt a lot easier to aim. The FAMAS actually did have a bit of a bug during the beta, so it was kind of hard to say, but for the first couple shots with the like ACOG sight that it gets, it was really, really nice. I think this also plays into the fact that the FAMAS relies a lot on accuracy, getting those headshots in your burst, playing at a little bit of a further distance. The sight complemented it really well, and I could see the FAMAS becoming a lot more powerful. The AKM with the red dot, again, very, very good addition. The ARs in general just felt a lot better on this patch. And with the options to go with like iron sights or to have the sight on it, I can see a lot of people just kind of falling in love with one of a new AR if they haven't already. It feels like ARs have a much better chance at winning a lot of the fights versus how they felt before. So in general, the medium class feels like they can finally play at that medium to longer range that I don't think they've been able to do as effectively as they have in previous seasons because the model had just kind of taken over. And on that note, the model hasn't really been changed, but I think this is okay because of a lot of the other changes we've been getting. It feels like we're aiming more for buffs rather than nerfs. And I think a lot of the buffs are around having better accuracy at the medium to longer range. So I don't really want to see too many nerfs in general when it comes to the weapons. So what they've done so far has been great. The CL40 got a buff. You can now 3-shot heavies. And I think the way that they approached this was actually really, really good. So if you get like direct hits or like really, really close impacts, the damage is going to be better, but it falls off pretty quickly. So people who are very skilled with the CL40 are going to see a lot more success with it. So all you CL40 mains, you finally can be a little bit more competitive in the meta, which is a very welcome change. And it's not going to be like how we've had it previously where it felt like the CL40 was just a crutch for people who didn't have aim. Now it rewards you if you do have aim. So very good addition. The melees, as far as I can tell, didn't really get too much of a change. The riot shield, I feel like got a little bit of a buff, and it's kind of hard to tell. I don't think we saw too much of a change here in terms of where they will sit in the meta. They'll probably still be a little bit near the bottom. The revolver, while it didn't seem to get much of a change, it's really hard to see if like ranges got changed. I'm kind of going off of what I heard from other people, and it seems like this is the same, but the addition of the red dot sight, I think, is going to help really push this thing a little bit further into the meta because you can be so much more accurate with it. When I was testing it for a little bit, I found the kickback was still pretty hard, but I think the people who are maining the revolver, having that clear line of sight is going to be so much more useful than you think. And I could definitely see this thing being a really strong pick, especially now that it makes it a lot easier to land your headshots. For the gadgets, we got to see the data reshaper getting a buff to 3 charges. Now, this thing is only as useful as the counters you can face with it. So if there's tons of mines, tons of turrets, stuff like that, then it becomes more impactful. But the glitch and the expo mine actually got a nerf where they only have 1 charge. So the data reshaper, despite it getting a bit of a buff, it feels like it still won't be as impactful because the things that you can counter with it are not going to be seen as much in the meta. Seems from a lot of people, and even my experience myself, the heal beam seemed to have gotten nerfed, which I think is a very welcome nerf because basically every single medium and their grandma was using this. There was like only one person I can even think of, which is Sanguinites, who actually used the dematerializer over the heal beam. But since we didn't see much changes to the defib, it felt like the defib is exactly what it was before. I'm pretty sure that whole playstyle of using like model, heal beam, defib, and just 3 stacking that is probably going to take over the meta. I could see that being extremely useful, just running around with heal beam and defib. Considering a lot of the other nerfs and buffs we saw, the combination of having like 3 heal beams probably won't feel as impacted with this heal beam nerf. I could see spamming it on multiple teammates still being very useful. And the DMAT did get buffed, but I think this is like an interesting topic because to me, somebody who doesn't use the DMAT very often, and maybe people who aren't really familiar with it because we've been just kind of on the meta heal beam loadout, the DMAT kind of feels better. But for people who have been using it a lot, they've gotten really used to like where holes are going to open, and they close them up very quickly. So they'll go through it, turn around, and quickly close it up. The second part, where you're closing it up, is actually a lot harder because when you open up a wall and it opens up like 4 different spots and you turn around and close it, I believe you have to aim at the very specific spot that you got that detected 4 different sections in order to close all 4. So if you're quickly turning around to close, you might only close 1 or 2 spots and maybe not close it entirely, which can allow people to continuously chase you, or you might have to use multiple charges just to close that one hole you made. So for people who have been maining DMAT, this might actually be a nerf, but for people who have not been using it, this might feel like a buff. So accessibility kind of went up, but I think at the cost of that high skill. I think what they might want to do in the future is make it so you can simply just right click to close all of the holes that you have opened instead of even having to look at them, be there. Or if they want to do it where you still have to look at it and be close enough to it, they can make it where if you close one, anything attached to it closes with it. And I think that might help add a bit of a compensation for those people who have been maining it for so long. I'm not too sure where we should go with this, but I think when it comes to dematerializer mains like Sanguine, I think he should be the one who kind of gives the feedback on how this thing should be buffed or nerfed in the future. I'm not too sure because it's such an uncommon play style, but I am glad to see that they're at least making changes. So hopefully we kind of get there as time goes on. Overall, I feel like the meta for medium class probably won't be changed. I'm pretty sure we're still going to see heal beams and model along with the defib and the double movement. But overall, I think the weapons might at least see a little bit more variety of play. I think the pike being added definitely has a place in the meta. It just is going to take some time for people to get used to it and master it. Now, when it comes to light class, the 9.3R, it seems like they were trying to buff it this time, but since it was bugged, it's so hard to say if it's better or worse. I still think that this is probably going to be the worst weapon in the game. So we'll have to see when the patch notes drop if they fix the bugs with it and see where it sits in the meta. But that's just my prediction. It's still going to be pretty bad. Now, when it comes to the dagger, being able to hold right click, I think, is a really good addition. We're probably going to see a lot more dagger users, and the people who have been maining it, I think this is actually good for the people who've been maining it. I can't really speak for them, but I'm just kind of speculating, because being able to hold it, I feel like allows you to get the timing of it a lot more controlled, which could be really, really good. The LH1, I feel like felt the same. I've heard some people saying the RPM went up, but the alternative sight that you got with it was bugged. So again, it's really hard to kind of speculate if it's going to be good or not. I think if they fix some of the bugs with the sights, the LH1 with a sight could be decent, but realistically, this thing gets just so outclassed by the pike that I think if you're facing an enemy that is using the pike, the LH1 is just going to be inferior to it. So I can't really say that the LH1 would end up in the meta unless we get an RPM buff. The M11 seemed like it wasn't changed, but the thing is, with that red dot, it felt like a new gun. This thing felt really, really nice. And I think it might finally compete with the XP54 due to some changes that might or might not have happened. I'm not too sure, but we'll get to that later. Now, the new weapon, the M26 Matter, felt really, really nice. It honestly kind of felt like the double barrel, but nerfed a little bit, but then made a little bit easier to use. The fire rate kind of seems like it's a little bit slower or about the same as the SH, but the time to kill on it was basically like 2 shots to a medium and 3 shots to a heavy, but that's only if you're landing basically every pellet. So doing that consistently is going to be really, really hard. So you're more likely looking at having to throw in an extra shot or 2 depending on the range and your accuracy. But the tempo with it felt pretty nice. With something like dash, I could see it being like you throw a vanish bomb, get in close, land 1 shot, and then you just start dashing around trying to finish them. I'm not too sure if this thing is really going to be in the meta, but I could see it being used quite a bit, especially for the people who want to master it, because it does feel like a very strong weapon, but it doesn't seem to have the fast time to kill that the double barrel has, where like the double barrel might be able to be used in like a competitive scene because you can get in, quickly get that kill, and then quickly get out. Whereas the Matter, it seems like you have to use a lot of your dashes to get the 1 kill to then escape. So versus good players, they're more than likely going to follow up and kill you before you can kind of finish that kill. But it's going to take some time for people to like master it and figure out the playstyle of it before we see its potential in the meta. I think when it comes to lower elo and casual lobbies, this is probably going to just stomp people. I feel like we're more than likely going to see a similar pattern to what we saw with like season 1 with the like cloak SH. We're just going to see a bunch of like dash M26 Matter players and like low elo just being an absolute nuisance, but only time will tell. Now, when it comes to the bow, I'm not 100% sure if this got changed. During my testing, I feel like the baseline damage might have went up a little bit. If so, that'd be kind of nice. I feel like the bow has needed a little bit of help, because as much as I really, really want to use this in like ranked for season 4, it realistically just isn't strong enough. So I'm more than likely going to have to go with another class. I am kind of speculating early that the meta might be triple medium, potentially HML. I'm not too sure, but I feel like we finally are out of that double heavy medium meta that we've been in for so long, which is fantastic news to me, but I really hope it's not triple medium. Anyway, we will have to obviously test this out and see. Whatever kind of ends up being meta is more than likely what I'm going to start to use, because with the new ranked grind, I definitely want to start trying, and I'm going to have to use whatever is the best in order to push for those leaderboards. It's not like World Tour where I've been kind of goofing off and using bow and having fun with a bunch of like recommended loadouts from my chat and using a bunch of silly stuff. So I'm really excited to see where the meta goes this season. Now, when it comes to the sniper, this seemed to be the same with the sword, but the throwing knives did actually get a buff. And now this was only in the form of being able to hold the right click, which I had been saying was a change that we needed from like back in season 1 when this was introduced. It just let us hold right click, and then, you know, we can kind of balance it from there. But they kept nerfing and buffing the RPM of the weapon, and it got to a point where I was like, well, now you can just spam it and it's very obnoxious. And then they toned that down, and then it's like, well, now it's bad. So now that we can hold it, it felt a lot better. I was using this in World Tour, and it felt like I could hold this, then dash in to enter with a fight with a bit of a burst, and then try to follow up with a couple of shots. So I feel like people who get really skilled with it might have a lot more success than what they've had previously, but I don't think it's going to be that annoying spam throw over and over again that we saw in season 2 and early season 3 that was kind of the quintessential pub stomping option for light. because of the fact that there was no drawbacks. You could just keep throwing. So it was definitely ruining a lot of casual lobbies, and there was tons of begs for nerfs for it. The V9S, I can't speculate too much on how good the red dot is going to be because of how bugged it was in the playtest. Basically, if you spammed it at like high speed, the red dot would just kind of disappear. So I don't really know how good or bad this is going to be. If they can polish that up where the red dot actually stays in the center of the reticle, I could see it being actually a very good addition, and we might actually see the V9S used a lot because there's so much potential with this weapon. It has really good damage per magazine, really good TTKs, and a relatively fair range potential. So I think this is actually going to be something that shines depending on if it gets polished up or not. Now the XP54, I've heard from people that this actually got a ranged nerf, which I think is a very interesting approach. I think what it seems to be is like a lot of the options for the other classes in terms of how they can play at range kind of got buffed. Whereas the light class, it seems like none of the things that were at range got really buffed, but it seems like some of their range got nerfed, especially in this XP. And from what I heard was like in the testing range, somebody wasn't able to kill the heavy with one clip at a further range, which I think was really, really interesting to hear. And if that's the case, I think that's what a lot of people have been asking for is an XP range nerf. So we might actually see some different loadouts on the light class. And I also find that kind of interesting because for the most part, we actually didn't see many nerfs to the weapons. It was mainly just buffs. Whereas when it comes to light, only some of the really like kind of low pick options, kind of like the dagger and the throwing knives, tended to get like a bit of a buff, but in more of like a rework, not necessarily a full-on buff. But there wasn't too many buffs on the light class for weapons outside of like, you know, these rework things, but it seems like we actually got some nerfs. So it seems like I said before where they're trying to up the weapon power of medium and heavy so that they can put up a better fight versus the light class where they're kind of, you know, getting in, doing some damage, getting out, and sort of playing that poke and run. So now the competition in 1v1s, I mean, light realistically shouldn't win most 1v1s, but I think especially now, even at range, they really aren't going to have that success rate that they might have had in the previous seasons. And then when it comes to the gadgets, we saw some nerfs and buffs here. So the gateway got a pretty big nerf for specifically in my playstyle and a lot of other people's playstyle where we can't throw stuff through it. The cash box doesn't go through it. So gateway was basically used by everybody. It's probably one of the best gadgets. So if they wanted to nerf this, I can kind of understand that. I do feel like it was a bit annoying because this sort of has how they were introducing it. It was like you can throw stuff through it, and that was the whole point of it. So them removing that felt a little weird. I don't even know if this is a bug or not. I didn't really get any confirmation, but is very interesting. And then the breach charge got a buff. Maybe we'll finally start seeing breach charges. The tracking dart did get a buff as well. We now have 4 charges, which I think is kind of crazy. Maybe this will finally get picked up by some players, and I think it's going to complement that reconnaissance scouting role that the light kind of has been playing into. The stun gun didn't actually get changed, which I thought was kind of crazy. If anything, it felt like it might have got a range buff. I personally am kind of worried when it comes to Season 4 that the stun gun is going to start to overtake a lot of the meta, and it's going to be really frustrating as a lot of people are going to be running this and just stunning over and over, especially if the mesh shield does get reworked or nerfed to some degree. I could see stun gun becoming a problem of just, you know, constantly spamming it, especially when it comes to the lower elos, where we see a lot more light players the lower MMR you go, and then the higher MMR we see a lot less. But I think that this is going to start to become a problem in higher elo, but this purely depends on the mesh shield, because mesh shield has been one of the best counters to dealing with the stun. And I think if they do want to nerf mesh, which I kind of agree with, I think stun is going to need a nerf, or even like shorten the range by even more and then potentially give it to medium or give it to heavy. Like I've mentioned many times in my other videos, the amount of gadgets and the amount of weapons that light has is just way more than medium and heavy. And I get really worried that with so many options on light, that if you try to balance it, we're still going to always have more light players because there's so much more versatility. You can play in so many different ways, range, medium, close, you know, dash, cloak. Like you can kind of really mix and match a lot more things and make that playstyle that suits you a lot easier on light. So like I said, I think stun is going to start to become an issue, and it'd be really nice if we started moving some stuff. Even the tracking dart could go to medium, stun could go to heavy, and then we kind of nerf the stun from there. I don't really know. Maybe you guys, if you have suggestions on what we could do to sort of balance out the options. I think giving some of Light's gadgets over to Heavy and over to Medium could help balance out the game a little bit better, purely in how many options you get. Especially because we've seen from so many seasons before that Light has never really been meta. It's always kind of been the weakest pick, but it's always had the most options. But I do feel like this season we're probably going to get to a point where the stun gun could become really annoying. But this is all dependent on how the mesh shield ends up on live. Now Grapple, I think Grapple got a buff. The reach just felt a lot longer. Like I've used Grapple quite a bit. Like I've max level all the specializations on the class, and it's really hard to kind of test, back to back. But I think Grapple got a reach buff, so I think that is pretty cool if it did, because Grapple hasn't always been the best. It is really fun though. Now when it comes to the new map, I think the new map fits the theme of a game show really well. It has all these sponsored arenas. It just felt really the finals, if that makes sense. Like it just really suited into this game world. I really like playing it. The buildings themselves felt so grand. They felt so different from what I've seen before. The layout of the map kind of reminds me a bit of like Skyway and Seoul, but every single building that you go into felt very unique in it. I was getting lost going from one building to another, because sure, there might be some things that are aesthetically similar, but the layout and the way that the entire building is sort of designed just felt very different from a lot of what we've seen before. So I was just getting lost. I think because of how complex some of the buildings are and how big they are, that map specifically, I could see Dematerializer being a lot better. Being able to open up a wall on the stairs way up on a building and then start poking, or going from top floor to bottom floor anywhere, would be really, really strong, especially since there's tons of like little rooms and corridors. Being able to just pop in and pop out wherever you want would be really, really nice. Now, I want to give some closing thoughts on the season, maybe talk a little bit about my prediction in the meta. So when it comes to all the classes, basically every nerf and buff that we saw, I think was a really, really good addition. There really wasn't anything that I kind of thought was bad. The only thing I questioned a little bit was the AKM getting that 4-bullet nerf. But when I used it, it felt really, really strong. Like I didn't even notice that it got nerfed until somebody had pointed it out. And it was just the 4 bullets. But maybe the weapons got a bit of a range buff because they did feel pretty good at range. I'm not too sure, but like I said, across the board, all the buffs and nerfs, I agree with. I think they were really, really good to help balance out the meta, add some more variety. And I feel like what this season has done specifically is really cater to those sandbox-oriented players like myself who love to try new builds, try to like counter the meta, try to invent something new. I feel like I can finally do that, whereas previously it just felt like, no, just, if you're not using the meta loadout, you're kind of screwed. So I really, really applaud them for all the efforts that they've done on balancing the game this season. Another thing that I'm a little bit unsure of is like, I kind of hope they do something with the stun gun. I feel like stun gun has been a really big annoyance for a lot of people, especially in like casual and lower elo. I think when it comes to higher elo, like if you stun somebody that is good, they are just going to turn around and kill you. That's just been the case basically across the board when it comes to high elo. The only times that we really find strength in it is when we have our team there to follow up. Like we stun somebody, back away, call out who's stunned, and then your team kind of collapses on them. And then you poke in your head after and finish up the rest of the team with your team. So stun is kind of used a lot differently in like higher elo versus lower elo. But the thing is that it's used on every single class. So it would be nice for them to kind of either tone it down a bit, or like I said, give it to somewhere else, whether it be medium or heavy. You guys can definitely disagree with that. I really don't know. I would just kind of like to see some testing and some experimenting with how they can approach balancing out the stun, because I do agree with the lower elo, the higher elo, where it's basically used all the time. I don't agree with the fact that it's a free kill, because it's purely based on like what MMR you're kind of speculating on it being used in. When it comes to higher elo, like it's definitely not a free kill. It's just used as a way to open up an opportunity. Whereas in low elo, it 100% is just a free kill. Even when I play it in World Tour, if I stun somebody, it is a free kill, because people don't have that reaction time and that accuracy that you might expect from a very good player that might be in the comp scene. So if you guys have any suggestions for stun changes, feel free to leave them below. If you think it's perfect where it is, feel free to also make that statement. I'm not too sure how the meta is going to play out. This is just a speculation. But overall, when it comes to this season, I think this is the strongest season I've ever seen from Embark. I've never been more excited to play the game. I absolutely loved playing in the preview test. Everything about this season feels like it's been heading in the correct direction. I absolutely love it. And honestly, I'm just really excited to start playing heavy again. Like I said, I've mained heavy in season 1 and for a bit of season 2, and then I started to get burnt out using the same loadout. So it'd be really nice to kind of bring back some more heavy gameplay on this channel. I kind of switched over to light a lot simply because the team that I was forming, it ended up with me being the light based on a lot of stuff we kind of discussed. But when it comes to World Tour, a lot of times you see me using a bunch of random loadouts like bow and even like the KS, winch, trying tons of different loadouts. So I'm excited to get back into some of my roots back in season 1 using maybe the Lewis gun, some Deagles, being a Jackie Welles cosplayer with Charge and Slam Deagle. Who knows? But what I do know is that the sandbox is back, the game show is back, and I am so stoked to play this season. It is by far my favorite season so far. And if you guys want to see some guides on all the new weapons and further guides on the finals in general, feel free to subscribe. Thank you to all my members. I also want to quickly shout out Sugi and Noble, who really helped up during the preview event. I had a lot of viewers on Twitch during that. We had the chat kind of going crazy, asking questions, and they did so much to just step up and actually help out, answer tons of questions, and help make the stream a lot more of a success. Thank you to everybody who even showed up to the stream. It was crazy how much support I got there. So thank you so much. Comment below what your favorite part of season 4 is. I know I asked you to comment for a lot of things, but hopefully, depending on what you want to answer, feel free to answer it. And I'm going to ask all the contestants out there, please, let's go with Azalt. Let's make Azalt the best sponsor of season 4, and I will see you in the finals.